Sister called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I could hear it in her voice before she even said a word. That slight catch in her breath. The way she said my name, just Claire, like she was already apologizing for something. He filed, she said. It's done. I was standing in the kitchen, still in my work clothes, one hand holding a spatula over a pan of chicken I'd been making for dinner. I set the spatula down. I didn't say anything for a second because there was nothing to say that would make it less awful. My sister, my big sister, the one who taught me how to drive, who showed up to every single one of my school plays with a handmade sign, who cried harder than I did at my own wedding, had just told me her marriage of 9 years was over. Come stay with me, I said. I didn't even think about it. Pack a bag and come tonight. She hesitated. What about Daniel? I'll tell him. Just come. I want to pause here for a second, because I know what you're thinking. And honestly, looking back now, I think I was already bracing for it, not because my husband Daniel had ever said anything directly about my sister, but because I had learned slowly, quietly, over 4 years of marriage, that there was a certain kind of reaction I got from him whenever my family needed something from me, a tension that settled into his shoulders, a silence that had weight to it. I had learned to read those silences the way you learn to read weather. My sister Meg arrived around 8 that night with a single duffel bag and red eyes and a bottle of wine she'd brought because she said she didn't want to show up empty-handed even in a crisis, which is so completely her that I almost started crying right there in the doorway. I hugged her for a long time. She smelled like the lavender lotion she's used since we were teenagers. Daniel came out of the home office around 8:30. He said hi to Meg. He was polite. I'll give him that. He was always polite in the surface-level way that's almost harder to argue with than if he'd just been openly rude. He asked how she was doing. He made a brief, appropriate comment about how sorry he was to hear about the divorce, and then he looked at me, and I saw it. That micro-expression, there and gone in half a second, and I knew. We talked about it after Meg fell asleep on the couch. Or rather, Daniel topped. I listened. How long is she staying? He asked. We were in the kitchen, voices low, and he was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. In that way he had when he was being patient but wanted you to know it was costing him something. I don't know, I said. She just found out today. She doesn't have anywhere to go right now. She has an apartment, which she shared with him. She can't go back there yet. He nodded slowly. I just think we should set some boundaries. For our own sanity. Maybe a week? I remember looking at him and thinking, this is my sister. This is the person who drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to sit with me in the emergency room when I had that allergic reaction in 2019 and Daniel was out of town for work. This is not a stranger asking to crash on our couch. This is my family, but I said, okay, we'll see how things go. I said that because I had learned by then that the path of least resistance was usually the one that kept the peace. And I was very good, by that point, at keeping the peace. Meg slept on our couch for the first 2 nights. On the 3rd day, I ordered an air mattress from Amazon and set it up in the spare room, the one we used as a home office and general dumping ground for things that didn't have a place anywhere else. I cleared out space in the closet. I put fresh towels in the guest bathroom. I wanted her to feel like she wasn't an inconvenience, because she wasn't. She was my sister. But Daniel had started doing this thing by day 3, where he would come home from work and go straight to the bedroom. Not even a hello to Meg. Not even eye contact. He'd pour himself a drink, close the bedroom door, and stay there until dinner. When I asked him about it, he said he was just tired and needed to decompress after work. You've always decompressed in the living room, I said. I need more quiet right now. That was it. That was the whole conversation, Meg noticed. I know she did because she started spending more time in her room with the door closed, coming out only when she could hear that Daniel had gone to bed. She started apologizing for things that didn't require apology, for taking too long in the bathroom, for eating the last of the Greek yogurt, for existing in a space that was supposedly also hers for the time being. One evening I found her in the kitchen at 10 p.m., eating crackers and cheese standing up at the counter because she'd heard us arguing earlier and hadn't wanted to interrupt by coming out for dinner. We hadn't even been arguing. Daniel had just been in a mood. and I'd been trying to smooth it over, and the whole thing had apparently been loud enough that my sister had decided to make herself invisible rather than be in the way. I sat down next to her at the counter. We ate crackers and cheese together and didn't talk about it, and I pretended that this was normal, and she pretended she believed me. That was day 5. On day 6, Daniel came to me and said he thought it was time to revisit the timeline. "She's not doing well," I said. "She's going to therapy now, she's looking at apartments, she's trying to put her life back together after almost a decade with someone she thought she'd be with forever. She needs a little more time." "I understand that," Daniel said in the voice he used when he was being very reasonable, and he needed me to acknowledge that he was being very reasonable. "But we have our own routine, our own life. I feel like a guest in my own home. A guest in his own home." I thought about what it might feel like to be my sister right now. 41 days since she'd signed the papers, 2 therapy appointments a week, a new job search, because her old company had been the one her ex-husband worked at, and she couldn't go back there. She was rebuilding everything, every single thing. And she was doing it while trying not to be a burden, while tiptoeing around a brother-in-law who decided her presence was disrupting his ability to decompress after work. I told Daniel she'd be out within the week. I said it quietly. He thanked me and went back to watching TV. I texted Meg that night, "No rush, take the time you need." And then I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was made of 2 completely different people who couldn't agree on anything. Meg left after 11 days. She'd found a short-term rental, a furnished studio apartment about 20 minutes away, and she moved her duffel bag and the few things she'd accumulated at our place into her car on a Saturday morning. I helped her carry boxes. Daniel stayed inside. She hugged me in the driveway for a long time. She said, "Thank you for having me. I know it wasn't easy." I said, "Stop it. It was nothing. That's what family does." She gave me a look. Just a quick one, barely there, and I knew she knew it hadn't been nothing. But we didn't say anything else about it. I cried after she drove away. I told Daniel I was just going to the grocery store, and I sat in the parking lot of a Kroger for 20 minutes before I could make myself go in. Life went back to normal. Or what passed for normal. Daniel relaxed, visibly, in the way a house relaxes after a window is finally opened. Just a general loosening of tension that told me everything I'd tried to pretend wasn't happening. I didn't bring it up. I filed it away in the same mental cabinet where I kept all the other things I'd chosen not to examine too closely. And then, about 2 months later, Daniel told me his mother was coming to stay with us for the holidays. Not asking. Telling. "She's flying in December 20th, he said. "I figured she'd stay through New Year's. That gives us good time together over Christmas." I set down my coffee cup. Slowly. "How long is that?" "About 12 days. I want you to really sit with that number. 12 days. For the record, my sister who was going through one of the worst experiences of her life, who had nowhere else to go, who was already paying for her own therapy and actively searching for her own apartment, had been allowed 11 days on our couch before Daniel started talking about revisiting timelines. His mother, who lives in a perfectly nice house in Phoenix, who has absolutely no crisis requiring emergency housing, who simply wanted to spend the holidays with her son, was pre-approved for 12 days, planned months in advance, with no input from me whatsoever. I'm not unreasonable. I want to say that clearly. I actually get along fine with Daniel's mother. She's pleasant enough. She remembers my birthday. She compliments my cooking. She doesn't make passive-aggressive comments about how Daniel looked thinner before we got married. By mother-in-law standards, I've heard worse. But that's not the point. The point is what happened next, when I said, very carefully, very calmly, "That's 12 days. When Meg stayed, you said you needed a timeline after day 6. Daniel looked at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't quite speak. "That's different." "How? That's my mother. This is a family holiday. Meg is my family." "It's not the same situation, Claire." I asked him to explain to me how it wasn't the same situation. He talked about holidays. He talked about how his mother was traveling from far away, how it made sense to make the most of the trip. He talked about how Meg had been going through something emotionally difficult, which had added stress to the household. I said, "So your mother being here for 12 days won't add any stress? He said, "It's different." He said that twice, maybe 3 times. Every time I found the gap in the logic, that was the answer that appeared to fill it. It's different. It's just different, Claire. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I lay in the dark and I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller in this marriage. All the times I'd said, okay, we'll see how things go, when what I'd meant was, this isn't fair, but I don't have the energy to fight about it. All the times I'd sat in grocery store parking lots crying by myself because it seemed easier than making him uncomfortable. I thought about Meg eating crackers at 10 p.m. because she'd heard tension in the house and decided to remove herself from the equation. I thought about the way she'd looked at me in the driveway when she said, "I know it wasn't easy." I had spent a long time telling myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as having peace, that if I managed everything carefully enough, smoothed every rough edge before Daniel could feel it, we could have a life that worked. I was 31 years old, and I had become so skilled at disappearing that sometimes I couldn't find myself. I got up. I went to the living room and I sat on the couch in the dark. And I thought, Daniel's mother arrived December 20th, as planned. I picked her up from the airport because Daniel had a work call that ran late. I helped bring in her 3 suitcases. She always overpacks. He always says it fondly. And I made up the guest room with fresh sheets and put a little basket of toiletries on the dresser because that's the kind of person I am, apparently. That's the kind of person I am trained myself to be. The first few days were fine. We watched Christmas movies. I cooked a lot. Daniel was relaxed and warm in a way I hadn't seen in a while, and I tried to just be grateful for that, tried not to let myself sit with the comparison I was making. But then, on the 23rd, Meg texted me asking if I wanted to grab coffee. She'd had a hard week. Her ex-husband had been trying to negotiate some final details of the settlement, and it had stirred everything back up. She sounded lonely. She asked if maybe she could come over for a little bit, see me, maybe have dinner with us if that was okay. I told her of course. I didn't ask Daniel. I want to be honest about this. I didn't ask him because I already knew what the answer would look like. Not the words. He wouldn't say no outright. He was never that direct. But the vibe. The shift in the air pressure. The quiet punishment that would follow. So I just told Meg to come at 6. She arrived with a bottle of wine and that same apologetic energy she'd carried the whole time she'd stayed with us. She said hello to Daniel's mother. She helped me set the table. She was trying so hard to be unobtrusive that it almost broke my heart. Dinner was quiet, not hostile, just heavy. Daniel was doing the thing where he wasn't not participating, but his participation had a wall around it. Short answers. Eyes on his plate more than usual. His mother, to her credit, tried to make conversation with Meg, asked about her job search, her new apartment. She was kind. She didn't know there was anything wrong. Meg left around 9. She hugged me at the door and said, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm good." After she left, Daniel said, "I thought it was just going to be family for the holidays." And there it was. I had been waiting for it without knowing I was waiting for it, and when it finally arrived, I felt something shift in me. Not anger exactly, more like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for a very long time. "She is my family," I said. "She's my sister. You know what I mean." "I actually don't think I do," I said. "Explain it to me." He didn't explain it. He said he just thought it would be nice to have some dedicated time with his mom, and that it felt like I was always making him out to be the bad guy, and that he was just expressing how he felt. I nodded. I said goodnight to his mother. I went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, and then I opened my phone and I texted Meg, "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" She responded in about 14 seconds, obviously. "Yes. Come now if you want." I didn't go that night. But the next morning, December 24th, while Daniel was in the shower and his mother was in the kitchen making coffee, I packed a bag. Not dramatically, not throwing things, not slamming drawers. I folded my clothes carefully. I packed my charger, my toiletries, the novel I'd been reading. I took the small photo from the nightstand, the one from Meg's birthday 2 years ago when the 3 of us, me, Meg, and our mom, had gotten dinner and laughed so hard we cried. I carried the bag out to the living room. Daniel's mother was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked at the bag and then looked at me. "I'm going to go spend a few days with my sister," I said. She nodded, slow and understanding in a way that made me wonder what she had seen in her son over the years. That sounds nice, honey. Daniel came out a few minutes later. He stopped in the hallway. He looked at the bag. He looked at me. What's going on? I had rehearsed this conversation in my head 100 times, always imagining some big speech, some list of everything I'd been holding on to, but standing there in the hallway on Christmas Eve, I just felt tired. Not sad, not angry, just tired in the way that comes from a very long time of working very hard at something that was never going to give you what you were working for. I'm going to stay with Meg for a few days, I said. Now, it's Christmas Eve. I know. My mother is here. I know. My mother is here. I know. I made a casserole. It's in the fridge. Instructions are on the foil. There's a pie on the counter. Everything's covered. He stared at me. Why are you doing this? I thought about it. I thought about the question seriously, because I thought he deserved a real answer. When my sister was going through the hardest thing she'd ever been through, I said, she stayed here for 11 days. You counted every one of them. You asked me about timelines on day 6. You stopped coming out of the bedroom. She ate crackers alone in the kitchen at 10 o'clock at night because she felt like she was in the way. I paused. Your mother has been here for 4 days, and she's healthy and fine and not in any crisis. And when my sister came to have dinner with me last night, one dinner, you said you thought it was supposed to be family time. He opened his mouth. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said. I'm going to spend Christmas with my sister because she's my family, and I love her and she needs me, and I need her. And I should have said that a long time ago instead of managing everything so carefully that I forgot to take up space. I picked up my bag. Claire, the casserole needs 45 minutes at 350, I said. Foil on for the first 30. I said goodbye to his mother. She hugged me. She held on for a beat longer than expected. I drove to Meg's apartment with the radio off. The streets were quiet in that specific Christmas Eve way. Most people already where they were going, lights in windows, the particular stillness of a world that has temporarily stopped its usual rushing. Meg opened the door before I even knocked. She'd clearly been watching for my car. Her little apartment was warm, strung with the cheap Target garland she bought herself and the ornaments from our mom she'd taken when she moved out of her house. It smelled like the candle she always burned, the one that smelled like pine and something sweet underneath. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. She took my bag. She poured me a glass of wine. We sat on her small couch, the one that barely fit in her living room, and we watched a terrible movie on Netflix and ordered Thai food because neither of us felt like cooking, and at some point I started crying. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way you cry when something is finally over and you haven't let yourself admit until this exact moment how much you wanted it to be. Meg didn't say anything. She just moved closer and put her head on my shoulder and let me cry it out. Later, when the food had arrived and we'd turned off the movie and were just sitting there, plates in our laps, she said, "You know what took me so long to leave?" I kept thinking I just hadn't found the right way to explain it yet. Like, if I just said it better, he'd finally understand. I knew she was talking about her ex-husband, but I also knew she was talking to me. Yeah, I said. I know exactly what you mean. I stayed at Meg's for 4 days. I texted Daniel when I arrived to let him know I was safe, and we had some back and forth over the next few days that I'm not going to detail here, because it was the kind of conversation that's important but private, the kind that requires more honesty than either of us had managed in a long time. What I will say is this: I came home, eventually, and things were different. Not fixed, different. The kind of different that means something has been acknowledged, that cannot be unacknowledged, which is both uncomfortable and necessary. I started therapy in January, individual therapy for myself, which was something I'd been telling myself I'd do eventually for about 3 years. My therapist asked me in our second session what I was most afraid of. Not in my marriage, just in general. What was the thing underneath everything? I thought about it for a long time, and then I said, I think I'm afraid that if I take up too much space, people will leave. She nodded and wrote something down. Where do you think that came from? I thought about Meg in the kitchen with her crackers, about the way I'd been keeping track all those years of how much I was allowed to want. About driving home from the airport after dropping off my mother-in-law before any of this had happened, with that faint unease I could never quite name. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm starting to figure it out." That's the thing about moments like the one I had on Christmas Eve. Packing that bag, standing in that hallway, saying the thing I'd been not saying for 4 years. They don't fix everything, they're not meant to. They're just the moment you finally stop pretending the silence is the same thing as peace. My sister texted me last week. A photo, just her new apartment, the one she signed a real lease on, the one that's hers alone and full of things that are only hers. She'd finally hung pictures. There was a plant on the windowsill. She looked in the selfie she sent alongside it like someone who'd remembered how to breathe. I sent back a string of hearts. She sent back a string of hearts. She sent back, "We're going to be okay, you know." I looked at that message for a while, and for the first time in longer than I can say with any precision, I believed it. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to keep the peace. For a long time, I thought it meant managing things carefully enough that nothing ever boiled over, smoothing the rough edges before Daniel could feel them, saying, "Okay, we'll see how things go," when what I actually meant was, "This isn't right, but I don't have the energy to say so." I was good at it. I had practiced it for years without ever realizing that's what I was doing. The thing about that kind of peace is that it's not real. It's just silence that's been trained to look like calm. What I did on Christmas Eve, packing that bag, standing in the hallway, finally saying out loud the thing I had been carrying in my chest for 4 years, wasn't impulsive. It was the result of every small moment I'd chosen not to examine. Meg eating crackers alone at 10 p.m. because she felt like she was in the way. Daniel counting the days of her stay like she was a problem with a deadline. The way I'd cried in a grocery store parking lot and told myself that was just how things were. None of those moments were dramatic on their own. That's the thing about how we lose ourselves. It's rarely one big event. It's 100 small ones, each one just ordinary enough that you can explain it away. I had explained away a lot. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of it, is that the way we treat people when it costs us something is the truest thing about us. Daniel was generous and warm with his mother. Not because she needed it more than Meg did, but because her presence cost him nothing. My sister grieving, rebuilding, trying so hard not to be a burden, was tolerated. His mother was welcomed. The difference wasn't circumstance, it was whose comfort mattered. And I had spent 4 years making sure his comfort mattered more than my own. That's not a character flaw, it's a pattern. And patterns have origins, and mine came from somewhere I'm still working through with my therapist. The belief that if I took up too much space, something important would be taken from me. That love was a thing you had to earn through smallness. I don't know exactly where I learned that, but I know I had learned it very well. What Meg said that night, "We're going to be okay, you know," wasn't just about her. She was telling me something she'd figured out on the other side of her own hard thing. That you can survive the moment you finally stop pretending. That it's actually survivable. That the fear of it is usually worse than the thing itself. I packed one bag. I drove 20 minutes. I sat on a small couch and ate Thai food and cried quietly and woke up the next morning feeling, for the first time in a long time, like I was in the right place. That's not an ending, that's a beginning of something harder and more honest, but I'll take it.